Hi, this is Sarah Harkness from In Accountancy, and today I want to talk to you a little bit about the requirement to file a UK property return if you sell a UK residential property that's subject to capital gains tax. It seems to me that a lot of people haven't realised that there's a new legal requirement to report these gains. And I think the reason for that is that, while I say new, this actually came into effect from April 2020. And I think we all know that there was an awful lot going on in the spring, summer of 2020 and beyond. And there were, a huge number of legislative changes and an awful lot of noise in the world of tax, finance, legislation, government support, and so on throughout the whole COVID pandemic. Now, initially from April 2020, the rules that came in required anybody selling a property that gives rise to a gain to report that gain within 30 days of completion of the property sale and to pay the liability within that same time frame too. Thankfully, the powers that be saw a little bit of sense and they extended that from October 2021 to 60 days. So I thought it might be useful to just take a few minutes to explore who needs to report, in what circumstances you don't need to report, what needs to report it, and how you go about that, and how you go about paying the actual liability should there be any due. Then in following videos, we're going to look very briefly at how you calculate the CGT, that's the capital gains tax, on the sale of a UK property. And we'll also look at the differences, because we get an awful lot of questions about the differences between capital expenditure on the one hand and repairs on the other hand for people who own properties in the UK that they either rent or let out. So, without further ado, who needs to file a UK property return? Well, basically this applies to anyone resident in the UK if you've sold a property that gives rise to capital gains tax, or if you've disposed of a property that gives rise to capital gains tax, because this doesn't necessarily apply only to a sale in the open market. It also applies to the gift of a property if it attracts a capital gain. So when we say any individuals in the UK, that would be an individual. It could be a partnership if you own properties in a partnership. It would also be if you own property jointly with your spouse or a sibling or a friend. It applies to trustees who sell a property that gives rise to CGT, and it also would apply to the personal representative of another individual. So for example, if you're the executor of a will, or if you're acting as power of attorney for an individual and the property is sold. Now, what sort of properties give rise to capital gains tax? So this is all about residential property. If you have a mixed use property, then that is proportioned. So for example, mixed use property might be a property that has a shop on the ground floor and it has residential living accommodation on the top floor. So it would just be that residential living accommodation that would give rise to this return being required. And it only applies, as I've said, if there is CGT to be paid. So if you've never lived in the property, or if you've only lived in the property for part of the time you've owned it, you will need to do a CGT calculation. Likewise, you'll need to do one if the property has been used as a holiday home by yourself, or if it has been let out as a residential buy-to-let property. So there are circumstances in which there's no CGT to pay, and if that's the case, then happy days, you don't need to file the return. So when might that be? So first and foremost, this does not apply to your principal private residence. If you've always lived in your home, you do not need to worry about this. It does not matter how much value your property has gone up by since you bought it until you sold it, if you've lived in it for the whole time. So you don't need to worry about that at all. Other circumstances in which you might not have any capital gains to pay and therefore no requirement to file would be if it's a transfer between you and your spouse, so spousal transfer, or between a civil partnership where there's no gain, no loss. So in that instance, no requirement. Also, there will be circumstances where the gain is fully covered by the various exemptions and reliefs that there are, or indeed by losses carried forward or losses in the current year that you sell. And there are other circumstances where people sell a property either at sort of a nil gain or sometimes at a loss. And in those circumstances, again, you aren't required to file a return. Okay, so we've established that some of you may not have to pay any gain and therefore you've got no reporting requirements. But if you do have a gain and you do need to report that gain, then let's look at how you need to do that. Now, this is something that you will need to do yourself. You're not able to ask an agent, for example, your accountant, to do this for you. You will actually need to set up an online digital account with HMRC, and it's called Capital Gains Tax on UK Property account. That was easy for me to say. So you need to set up that digital account. You can then authorise your agent or your personal representative to submit the gain on your behalf, but you need to set that account up yourself. And that's it. You can simply set up the account and then you submit your return to that account. There are certain very, very rare circumstances when HMRC will allow you to submit a paper form. They don't like to do that at the moment, and they will ask for specific reasons as to why you need to submit a paper form, but you can download a form from their website. And then whenever you've submitted your form, assuming you've done this online, you will automatically be given a 14-digit payment reference code, and you'll be sent a link whereby you can make the payment immediately. So it's super, super simple once you've done that. But what we need to do now is calculate the gain and figure out how much you're going to have to pay. So we'll do that in the next video. And in the meantime, if you find this useful, then I'd appreciate if you give a like or a thumbs up or share it with your friends or anybody else that you think might find value from it. Thanks very much and bye for now.